Welcome the anointed ones. When someone powerful quietly says they were telling the truth, the room doesn't get louder. It gets nervous, because truth doesn't make noise when it arrives. It makes people sweat. It makes phones start ringing. It makes old conversations get deleted. It makes folks who used to laugh at you suddenly start whispering your name like it's evidence. And here's the part nobody tells you. When a high-level player confirms your story, the shift is instant. Not emotional, not spiritual, structural. Power listens to power. And when power validates you, everything changes. See, most people think justice comes with drama. They expect shouting, confrontations, public apologies, big cinematic moments. That's not how it works in real life. In real life, it's quiet, way too quiet. The kind of quiet where people who ignored you for years suddenly act polite. The kind of quiet where doors start opening that were mysteriously locked before. The kind of quiet where your enemies look like they just remembered an appointment they forgot to run to, because someone important just checked the files, and what they found didn't match the story told about you. Here's a simple fact. In any system, corporate, social, family, institutional, once a credible authority validates your account, people immediately reassess risk, not feelings. Risk. Humans protect themselves first. Always. The moment your truth becomes verified, you stop looking like a target and start looking like a liability to anyone who mistreated you. That's when the panic begins, not because you attacked, not because you exposed them, but because you were right. And worse, you stayed consistent. Do you know how unsettling that is for people who built an entire narrative around discrediting you? They were betting on you breaking down, blowing up, or disappearing. Instead, you just kept existing, calm, unbothered, breathing like someone who already knows something they don't. That alone messes with people. It's almost funny when you think about it. The same people who once rolled their eyes at you are now triple-checking what you say. The same ones who called you dramatic are suddenly acting like HR representatives, smiles too wide, voices too soft, acting like they've always respected you. Funny how respect shows up the second consequences show up too. Coincidence? Yeah, sure. Because the truth is this: when somebody high-level confirms your story, it doesn't just clear your name, it rewrites the entire scoreboard. Now the spotlight isn't on you, it's on them. And trust me, they feel it. That's why the energy shifted. That's why they're nervous. That's why the people who once underestimated you are now moving like they're walking on thin ice. They're not scared of your voice, they're scared of your validation. And once you understand that, everything starts making sense. Number one, the moment a high-level player confirmed your story, the lies stopped being gossip and became legal risk. Before that confirmation, everything they said about you lived in the safest place possible for them: rumors. Rumors are convenient. Rumors don't need proof. Rumors let people shrug and say, "That's just what I heard." It gave them cover. They could smear your name, twist your behavior, and casually damage your reputation without ever feeling responsible. Because gossip feels light, harmless, disposable. But the second someone with real authority stepped in and said, "No, their story checks out," the entire atmosphere changed. Now it wasn't talk anymore. Now it was traceable, documented, serious. When a high-level person validates you, they're not operating on feelings. They're operating on facts, patterns, receipts, timelines. People at that level don't attach their name to something unless they're sure. Their reputation is currency. They don't spend it cheaply. So if they backed you, it means they saw enough evidence to stand on it confidently. And that's exactly what terrifies your enemies. Because once authority confirms the truth, every lie they told suddenly looks intentional. Not a misunderstanding, not miscommunication, intentional. And intent changes everything. Intent turns office drama into misconduct. It turns bullying into harassment. It turns "we just didn't like you" into discrimination or targeting. What used to be petty behavior now looks like liability. The same jokes, setups, and smear campaigns they thought were harmless start looking reckless when someone important is paying attention. That's when the backtracking starts. People deleting messages, acting overly nice, trying to clear things up, rewriting history mid-sentence. Not because they feel bad, because they feel exposed. They're not protecting their pride anymore. They're protecting themselves. Because the game shifted from social to serious, from opinions to consequences, and the craziest part is you didn't have to fight harder or yell louder. You didn't have to prove anything extra. All it took was one credible voice saying, "They're telling the truth," and suddenly the same people who dismissed you started moving like they're standing on thin glass. That's power. Not noise. Not revenge. Just the quiet moment when truth stops being gossip and starts being risk. Number 2, they were never afraid of you being wrong. They were terrified you might actually be right. People love to pretend they're annoyed by you because you complain too much or take things too seriously. That's the story they sell, that you're dramatic, sensitive, overthinking. But if you look closely, their reaction was never irritation. It was defensiveness. And defensiveness doesn't come from someone being wrong. It comes from someone getting too close to the truth. If you were truly mistaken, they would have relaxed. They would have laughed it off. Nobody panics over a false accusation that can be easily disproved. Nobody loses sleep over something that isn't real. When you're actually wrong, people correct you calmly and move on with their day. But that's not what they did. They over-explained. They ganged up. They tried to discredit you before you even finished talking. They rushed to label you instead of addressing what you said. That kind of behavior doesn't come from confidence. It comes from fear. Because deep down, they knew something you didn't know yet. You weren't guessing. You were observing accurately. You were connecting dots they hoped you'd never connect. You were describing things exactly as they happened, without the sugarcoating they depended on to look innocent. And that scared them. Because if you were right, then their behavior wasn't misunderstood. It was ugly. It was intentional. It was exposed. Being wrong would have made you harmless. Being right made you dangerous to their image. That's why they worked so hard to paint you as unstable or bitter. Not because it was true, but because if they could damage your credibility, they wouldn't have to deal with your accuracy. It was easier to attack you than to defend their actions. Think about it. Liars don't argue facts. They attack character. They don't say, "That didn't happen." They say, "Don't listen to them." That's fear talking. And the moment someone important confirmed your story, their worst nightmare came true. The thing they hoped was just your imagination turned out to be reality. Every time they called you crazy, they were secretly hoping you were. Turns out you weren't. You were simply paying attention. And nothing unsettles guilty people more than someone who sees clearly and refuses to lie to themselves about it. Number 3, your survival became proof, not luck. At first they told themselves you were just getting lucky. Lucky you didn't break. Lucky you didn't quit. Lucky you didn't disappear. Lucky you somehow kept going even after they stacked the pressure against you. Calling it luck helped them sleep at night. Because luck is random. Luck means you didn't really earn your footing. Luck means eventually your streak runs out and you fall like they expected you to. But time kept passing. And you were still there. Still standing. Still functioning. Still sane. Still telling the exact same story without changing details. At some point, luck stops making sense, because luck doesn't last years. Luck doesn't hold up under stress. Luck doesn't keep someone steady while they're being isolated, doubted, or quietly targeted. That's not luck. That's resilience. That's strength. That's proof. They thought pressure would expose you as weak. Instead, pressure exposed you as solid. Every attempt to shake you actually revealed how grounded you were. Every setback that was supposed to finish you just showed that you weren't easy to erase. And that's when the energy shifted. Because now your survival wasn't just survival anymore, it became evidence. Evidence that you weren't exaggerating. Evidence that you weren't unstable. Evidence that you weren't the problem they tried to label you as. If you were really as flawed as they claimed, you would have collapsed under half of what they did. Most people would. But you didn't. You adapted. You learned. You stayed calm. You kept moving forward without begging for validation. That consistency started to speak louder than any defense you could have made. People at higher levels notice patterns. They watch who folds and who holds. And when they looked at you, they didn't see someone surviving by chance. They saw someone surviving because their foundation was real. Because truth doesn't require acting. It just endures. That's what scared your enemies the most. Not that you fought back. Not that you exposed them. But that you simply refused to disappear. You outlasted every prediction they made about you. And when survival stops looking accidental and starts looking earned, it becomes something they can't dismiss anymore. It becomes proof that you were never the weak one in the story. You were the stable one all along. Number 4. The narrative they built about you just collapsed overnight. For a long time, they didn't fight you with facts. They fought you with a story, a carefully crafted story, the kind repeated in small conversations, side comments, group chats, and private meetings, the kind that slowly paints you a certain way without anyone realizing they've been influenced. Not evil, not dramatic, just difficult, just hard to work with, just too sensitive, just not a team player. Notice how soft those words sound, soft enough to seem harmless, but sharp enough to quietly ruin how people see you. That's how narratives work. They don't attack directly. They erode credibility little by little until people doubt you automatically. Before you even speak, minds are already made up. Before you defend yourself, the room has already chosen sides. And the worst part? They made it look natural. Like everyone just happened to feel the same way about you. Like it wasn't coordinated. Like it wasn't intentional. But it was built. Piece by piece. Every eye roll, every subtle joke, every just being honest comment, all of it designed to shrink your voice without looking aggressive. Because if they could control how people perceived you, they'd never have to address what you were actually saying. Then everything fell apart in one moment. One high-level confirmation. One credible voice saying your story checks out. Suddenly, that carefully built image cracked. Because authority doesn't run on vibes or gossip. Authority checks facts, and facts don't care about their little storyline. Now people had to reassess everything. If you were telling the truth, then all those labels don't make sense anymore. If you were right, then maybe you weren't difficult. Maybe you were just honest. Maybe you weren't dramatic. Maybe you were reacting normally to real problems. See how fast the spell breaks? Once the foundation is exposed as false, the whole thing collapses at once. And now they're scrambling. Because the same narrative that protected them is turning against them. People aren't questioning you anymore. They're questioning them. And there's nothing more uncomfortable than realizing the person you tried to discredit was actually the most truthful one in the room the entire time. Number 5, high-level people don't validate without receipts. When someone at the top steps in to confirm your story, it's not a casual nod. It's not a "I kind of believe you" shrug. People with power, influence, and authority don't attach their name to claims without proof. Their reputation, their credibility, and sometimes even their career depend on making the right call. One mistake, one false endorsement, and they can lose trust, status, and control. That's why they check. They verify. They look for patterns, evidence, timelines, records, everything that can't be argued with. So if a high-level player validated your story, that means they didn't just take your word for it. They saw it, they measured it, and they confirmed it was true. And the scary thing for your enemies is that this isn't just someone opinionated. This is someone whose voice carries weight, someone whose assessment changes how others perceive the situation instantly. Before this, your enemies could dismiss you with lies, rumors, or manipulation. They could smear your name and feel safe because nobody in a position to matter was listening closely. But now, there's proof. The kind that can't be ignored. Emails, reports, witness accounts, or patterns of behavior. All of it suddenly has a stamp of authority behind it. Their excuses, lies, and manipulations don't vanish, but they lose their power. And that's what terrifies them, because now they're accountable. Every wrong move, every manipulation, every attempt to discredit you is visible through the lens of someone credible. Their safety net disappears. They can't gaslight, dodge, or spin the story without facing consequences. They're panicking, not because you fought back harder, but because the silent confirmation of someone high-level is louder than any argument they could make. Authority doesn't just amplify your truth, it makes their deception crumble. And nothing rattles manipulative people more than knowing the world can now see what they hoped would remain hidden. Your enemy's panic isn't about fear of confrontation, it's about fear of exposure. One nod from the right person is all it takes to turn years of control, manipulation, and lies into obvious recklessness. That's the quiet, devastating power of validation at the top. Number 6. Their confidence disappeared because control disappeared. Confidence is funny. Most people think it's a personality trait, something you either have or you don't. But real confidence isn't about feeling untouchable. Real confidence is about control. When you know you can predict outcomes, influence situations, and manage perceptions, you walk through the world with certainty. That's what your enemies had. For years, they believed they were untouchable because they controlled the story about you. They controlled who believed what, who laughed, who ignored you, and who dismissed you. Control gave them the illusion of power. Then a high-level player stepped in and validated your story. Suddenly, that control evaporated. The narrative they meticulously built didn't matter anymore. The words, whispers, and labels that used to shield them lost their force. Authority doesn't answer to gossip or manipulation. It answers to facts. And once facts sided with you, their confidence didn't just waver, it collapsed. People who thrive on manipulation panic when they realize they can no longer predict how others will react. Every step they take becomes cautious, awkward, overthought. Emails are drafted and redrafted. Conversations are calculated and clipped. Smiles get too wide. Voices get too soft. Jokes feel rehearsed. It's a kind of nervous energy that's hard to hide because they know their old tactics don't work anymore. Control is their armor. Without it, they're exposed. Without it, every past action that once felt safe now looks reckless. Without it, the rules of the game change overnight, and they're forced to play by someone else's terms. Terms they didn't write, don't understand, and can't influence. Your calm, consistent presence was the catalyst. You didn't have to scream or prove yourself. Just by existing, staying grounded, and telling the truth, you unbalanced the people who thought they could predict your every move. That's why panic sets in, not because you're loud, not because you're aggressive, but because your presence proves they no longer hold the cards. When control disappears, confidence collapses. And when confidence collapses, even the most cunning manipulators look small, exposed, and frantic. That's the quiet, brutal effect of authority validating your story. Number 7. They're not mad you spoke. They're mad someone important listened. Most people think conflict comes from confrontation. They believe people panic or lash out because someone raised their voice, exposed secrets, or went public with the truth. That's only part of it. What really triggers fear and chaos is when the right person hears it. Someone whose opinion actually matters. That's when the whole game shifts. Suddenly, your words aren't just noise. Suddenly they carry weight, influence, and consequences. Before this, they could write you off. They could dismiss you as dramatic, emotional, or irrelevant. They could smirk at your concerns because nobody with authority was paying attention. You were, for them, harmless. But once someone high-level validates your story, those same words you spoke casually become uncomfortably heavy. They're not arguing against what you said. They're scrambling to control who now believes it. It's a subtle but terrifying difference. When someone important listens, it's no longer about you being right or wrong. It's about risk. Their actions, their words, their attempts to manipulate, lie, or undermine you are suddenly exposed to a perspective that carries influence. And the higher that perspective, the faster the panic spreads. Your enemy's anger isn't about your voice. It's about their fear of accountability. They're mad because someone who can change the system, sway the narrative, or protect your credibility has just confirmed that your story aligns with reality. They're mad because they can no longer gaslight without consequences. Their little world of control is collapsing quietly, and it's horrifying because it's unstoppable. And the most frustrating part for them, you didn't even have to fight harder. You didn't have to shout or prove your point. You just spoke your truth, consistently and calmly, and the right person finally listened. That's all it took. When someone important listens, everything you've been saying suddenly matters. And for those who thrived on dismissing, controlling, or undermining you, that moment is unbearable. Their panic isn't about your words. It's about who finally decided those words deserve to be heard. That's why the room goes cold, why messages get deleted, and why people who once ignored you now move like they're walking on thin ice. It's the quiet terror of accountability knocking at their door. Number 8, your integrity aged well while their behavior aged badly. Time has a way of revealing who people really are, and in this story, it didn't play fair for your enemies. While they were busy spinning lies, manipulating situations, and painting you as the problem, you were quietly consistent. Your words matched your actions. Your story didn't change. Your reactions were measured. Every time they tried to twist reality or gaslight you, you held steady. And over months or years, that steady presence didn't just survive, it gained credibility. Meanwhile, their behavior aged like poorly stored milk. Every contradiction, every excuse, every manipulation became more obvious with each passing day. Actions that once seemed clever now looked reckless. Lies that once seemed harmless now looked intentional. Their attempts to control the narrative didn't just fail. They left a trail. And anyone paying attention, anyone even casually observing, could see it. Patterns emerged. Motives became clear. The truth they tried to bury didn't stay hidden. When someone high-level confirmed your story, the contrast became undeniable. Your consistency made you trustworthy. Their inconsistencies made them suspicious. Suddenly, the room shifted. People started reading between the lines. People started questioning the stories they'd been told about you. Every misstep, every manipulative move they thought nobody noticed became glaringly obvious. Their credibility started cracking under the weight of time and truth. Your integrity wasn't flashy. It didn't demand attention. It just existed. It didn't need to fight back or defend itself. But the very simplicity of it made their chaos impossible to hide. While they burned energy covering tracks, rewriting history, and gaslighting, you let your consistency do the work for you. And that's the kicker. It's not about proving yourself to anyone. It's about existing in a way that truth naturally aligns with reality, while lies eventually implode on their own. In the end, this aging process isn't subtle, it's devastating. Your integrity gained gravity. Their behavior lost it. The people who once doubted you now see the real picture. And for those who built their confidence on manipulation, watching the truth stand while their lies crumble is the kind of reality that creates genuine panic. It's quiet, undeniable, and permanent. Number 9, their past actions are now liabilities. Everything they did to try to discredit you, every underhanded move, every whispered lie, every manipulation that once felt safe is now a problem. Actions that used to give them power are suddenly evidence against them. When someone high-level confirmed your story, it didn't just validate you, it cast a spotlight on every choice they thought was invisible. What was once clever now looks reckless. What was once hidden now has context. And what was once excusable now reads like proof of intent. Your enemies thrived on the illusion that time would bury their behavior. They counted on people forgetting, dismissing, or never noticing. But truth has a stubborn way of sticking around, and authority has a way of amplifying it. That nod from someone credible doesn't just verify your story, it highlights theirs. Every misstep, every attempt to gaslight or manipulate suddenly looks calculated. Every lie, every setup, every smear campaign can now be traced back to them with clarity. And that makes them nervous because they realize the past is no longer their playground. It's their courtroom. Liability isn't just about rules, it's about perception. And when perception shifts, everything they counted on, influence, credibility, comfort, collapses. People begin to question them. People notice patterns. The private whispers they relied on to shape opinion are no longer private. What was once safe territory for deception becomes unsafe exposure. Their actions now carry consequences they never expected, and they feel it instantly. The panic you see is a direct result of this realization. It's not anger. It's fear. Fear of accountability. Fear that their story can no longer hold up against someone with authority validating yours. Fear that the network of lies, manipulation, and control they built over months or years is collapsing piece by piece. And the ironic twist? They created their own downfall. The very efforts they thought would protect them, the lies, the gossip, the manipulation, now serve as evidence of recklessness, weakness, and intent. Their past, carefully curated and hidden, has transformed into a weapon against them, and they can't do anything to stop it. Number 10, they're realizing you weren't isolated. You were observed. For years, they acted like you were alone, like no one of consequence was watching, listening, or keeping track. That illusion gave them confidence. It allowed them to move freely, manipulate situations, and treat you however they wanted without worrying about scrutiny. Every insult, every slight, every behind-the-scenes attempt to undermine you felt invisible to them, because they assumed it was. That's why they got comfortable. That's why they underestimated you. Then someone high-level confirmed your story, and everything changed. Suddenly it became clear that you weren't just a lone voice crying in the void. You were being observed. Not casually, not sympathetically, but strategically. Someone with authority, insight, and influence had been paying attention to you. They'd been noticing patterns, behaviors, and truth behind the lies. Your enemies suddenly understood that nothing had gone unseen. Every subtle attempt to control, every manipulative move, every smear campaign, all of it had been on record, waiting for the right moment. That realization terrifies people who relied on secrecy. It shatters their sense of safety. What they thought was hidden forever is now visible. And the funny thing is, it doesn't take shouting or dramatic reveals to expose them. Just the quiet acknowledgement from someone credible is enough to unravel their comfort. Suddenly, they're aware that someone above them knows the real story. They start reading your every word, watching your every move, trying to guess what you know or who else might notice. This isn't paranoia. It's a natural reaction to being exposed after thinking you were untouchable. When your presence is validated by someone influential, your enemies no longer feel in control of the room, the narrative, or the situation. They're scrambling to adapt, fumbling through apologies, overcompensating with charm, and second-guessing every decision. Your calm consistency, your patience, and your truth didn't just survive their scrutiny, it thrived under it. And now they see it. They realize you were never isolated, you were always being observed, and that knowledge alone is enough to make the most confident manipulator start second-guessing themselves at every turn. Number 11. The system they relied on to protect them just stopped protecting them. For the longest time, they weren't bold because they were brave. They were bold because they felt covered by connections, covered by status, covered by who they know. They moved reckless because they believed the system would always side with them, not you. They thought the hierarchy was their shield. If anything ever happened, they were sure someone would step in and smooth it over. Someone would downplay it. Someone would say, "Let's not make this a big deal." They trusted that rules were flexible for them and strict for you. That's why they acted so comfortable while doing uncomfortable things. That's why they could smile while lying. That's why they treated you like you had no real options. Because in their mind, even if you spoke up, nothing would happen. The system would protect its own. And for a while, it looked like they were right. Doors stayed closed to you. Complaints went nowhere. People shrugged. You were made to feel small, dramatic, powerless. Meanwhile, they walked around like they had permanent immunity. But then something rare happened. Someone higher up chose truth over politics. Someone with real authority looked at the situation and didn't automatically defend them. And just like that, their protection vanished. No warning, no transition. One day they felt untouchable. The next day they felt exposed. Because now the system isn't bending for them anymore, it's evaluating them. That's a terrifying place to be when you know you haven't been clean. Now every action matters. Every past decision looks risky. Every complaint you ever made suddenly has weight. The same structure they once hid behind now feels like a spotlight. Policies they used to ignore suddenly apply. Rules they laughed at suddenly count. And you can see it in how they move. More careful, more tense, less arrogant. Because they finally understand something that you've known all along. When the system stops protecting you, all that's left is your actual behavior. And theirs doesn't look good under inspection. They weren't strong. They were shielded. And once that shield disappeared, so did their confidence. Number 12. Your calmness unsettles them more than anger ever could. Anger is loud. It's obvious. It grabs attention. It makes people defensive, sure, but it also signals a reaction they can predict. They see it coming, they prepare for it, and they respond with their usual tactics: gaslighting, manipulation, excuses. Anger is expected. Anger is something they can manage. But calmness? Calmness is disorienting. Calmness doesn't give them cues. Calmness doesn't follow the rules they think exist. Calmness doesn't demand a reaction, but it forces one anyway. And that's what terrifies them. When you stayed composed through manipulation, lies, and relentless attacks, it didn't just show self-control. It highlighted their instability. Every raised voice, every sneaky tactic, every attempt to pressure or confuse you was met with the same quiet, measured presence. You didn't have to prove yourself or retaliate. You didn't have to scream or act out. You just existed, grounded and steady, and that simple consistency made them frantic. They were counting on drama to justify their behavior, to make you look too much. They expected outbursts, breakdowns, emotional reactions, anything that could be spun into proof that you were unreasonable. But when that never came, their narrative fell apart. Calmness is a mirror, reflecting their chaos back at them. It's a truth they can't argue with, and a reality they can't control. And the most unsettling part? Your calmness amplified your credibility. It made every word you spoke sharper, every fact you stated clearer, every truth undeniable. Their lies, manipulations, and excuses became noise, drowned out by the quiet weight of your steadiness. They realized that no matter how loud they got, your presence alone exposed the inconsistencies in their story. Nothing rattles manipulators more than someone who refuses to play their game, refuses to respond in expected ways, and refuses to validate their false narrative. Your calmness wasn't passive. It was active power, a silent force that unsettled them far more than any anger could. And that is why, even without raising your voice, you became untouchable. Number 13. You didn't win by attacking, you won by outlasting. Most people think victories are loud. They think winning means making noise, proving a point, or striking back hard. But the kind of victory that truly shakes people, the kind that makes your enemies panic quietly in the corner, doesn't come from attacks. It comes from endurance. It comes from consistency. It comes from showing up day after day in a way they never expected and never controlled. Your enemies expected a reaction. They expected drama, emotion, confrontation. That's what they were trained to manage. They thought if they pushed hard enough, provoked enough, or manipulated enough, you'd break, yell, disappear, or fold. That's how the story would end, with you being difficult or unstable, and them looking justified. That's the world they were comfortable in. But you didn't play by their rules. You didn't bend. You didn't scream. You didn't chase validation or try to make them see. You simply endured. You stayed consistent. You stayed grounded. You lived your truth without needing to prove it to anyone. And over time, that quiet, steady presence became more powerful than any argument or confrontation ever could be. Outlasting them meant that everything they relied on to control the narrative, lies, gossip, manipulation, intimidation, slowly lost its effect. Their attacks, designed to break you, only highlighted your endurance. Their smears, designed to discredit you, now looked desperate because you didn't react the way they expected. Their confidence in their own control started to falter the moment they realized you weren't going anywhere. And when someone high-level confirmed your story, all those years of quiet persistence paid off at once. Their carefully built illusions crumbled because you were still standing. You didn't win with theatrics. You won because you refused to disappear under pressure. You won because consistency exposed truth, and truth doesn't need a fight to prove itself. Your victory isn't flashy. It's not immediate. It's cumulative. And that's what makes it terrifying to your enemies. They realize too late that patience, endurance, and integrity have outlasted every attempt to stop you. You became untouchable simply by refusing to fold, and that is far more powerful than any attack could ever be. Number 14. The real reason they're panicking is simple. They can't rewrite history anymore. For years, they edited the story of you like a novelist revising a plot, confident that no one would check the facts. Every slight, every misstep, every unfair judgment was carefully framed to make them look reasonable and you look problematic. They controlled perception, sculpted narratives, and whispered versions of reality into the right ears. And for a while, it worked. People believed what they were told. They assumed the gaps in the story were just your imagination. The truth was conveniently invisible. Then someone high-level confirmed your story, and suddenly the narrative they'd spent years shaping shattered. The carefully curated fiction they relied on to make themselves look untouchable, and you look flawed, couldn't hold up anymore. Once the truth had authority behind it, rewriting history was no longer an option. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to gaslight you became visible. What they thought was forgotten or unnoticed was now permanent. That realization terrifies them. The control they depended on, the version of reality they thought they could bend, the reputation they believed was untouchable, all of it slipped away. They see now that nothing can be unsaid, unseen, or erased. Time and authority have aligned, and your truth stands unmovable. They're forced to confront the reality they tried to hide, and every action they took against you now looks reckless, intentional, and undeniable. Their panic isn't about what you're doing in the present. It's about what can never be changed in the past. They can't undo messages, emails, patterns, or behaviors that are now framed in the light of truth. Every manipulation, every smear, every misrepresentation is now permanent evidence that undermines their credibility. And that's why their energy shifts. They second-guess themselves constantly. Every interaction is cautious, every word calculated. Because the safety they once had in rewriting the past no longer exists. You didn't have to fight them. You didn't have to create chaos. You just stayed real, consistent, and true to your story. And in doing so, you removed the one thing they relied on most, control over history itself. Their panic is proof that the truth doesn't just win, it lasts. In the end, this was never about revenge. It was never about clapping back, exposing people publicly, or trying to force the world to see your side. If that's what they expected, that's exactly why they miscalculated you from the beginning. Because what really happened is far more unsettling than any dramatic showdown. You didn't fight louder. You didn't beg to be believed. You didn't chase validation or try to tear anyone down. You simply stayed standing. And that's what broke everything they built. While they were busy whispering, manipulating, spinning stories and trying to edit reality, you were doing something much simpler and much harder. You stayed consistent. You stayed grounded. You kept telling the same truth without changing it to fit the room. You survived pressure that was designed to erase you. And without realizing it, you were building something they could never fake: credibility. So when that high-level player confirmed your story, it wasn't magic. It was math. Years of your integrity adding up. Years of their lies stacking against them. Years of you being calm while they were chaotic. Years of you enduring while they schemed. And when the scale finally tipped, it tipped fast. Because once authority backs the truth, gossip dies instantly. Once credibility enters the room, manipulation gets nervous. Once the system stops protecting the guilty, panic shows up right on time. That's why they're scrambling. That's why their energy changed. That's why the same people who underestimated you now move carefully around you. Not because you became louder, but because you became undeniable. And there's something deeply satisfying about that. Not petty, not bitter, just quiet justice. The kind where you don't have to say, "I told you so," because life says it for you. The kind where your enemies expose themselves just by trying to protect themselves. The kind where your story gets confirmed, and suddenly everyone realizes you were never the problem. You were the only honest one in the room. That's real power. Not forcing people to believe you, but living in such a way that eventually they have no choice. So if this message hit home, if you felt seen, understood, or reminded of your own strength, make sure you stick around. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Like the video so it reaches more people who need this truth. Drop a comment and share your experience. Your voice might help someone else realize they're not crazy, they're just right. And share this with someone who needs that reminder today. Because sometimes the truth doesn't shout. Sometimes it just stands, and the whole world adjusts around it. God bless you.